The judge's penetrating gaze bore into me as Karen's eyes widened in horror. In one fluid motion, she reached for the nearest object, a heavy oak stool, and hurled it straight at my head. Time seemed to slow as the stool hurtled through the air, my mind racing to comprehend the surreal turn of events. This was no ordinary courtroom altercation. The stakes had been raised to a level I could scarcely imagine. The fluorescent courtroom lights glared down upon us, rendering the wood-paneled walls and polished mahogany furniture almost painfully bright. My palms grew sweaty as I sat fidgeting in the witness stand, acutely aware of the judge's piercing gaze. This was it, my chance to finally tell my side of the story and see justice served. Across the room, Karen's lips curled into a sneer, her eyes narrowed to slits. The tension in the air was palpable as our gazes locked, unspoken fury radiating between us. I took a deep breath, steeling myself to recount the events that had brought us to this point. So, let me get this straight, the prosecutor began, leaning forward with an air of feigned nonchalance. You're claiming that Miss Simmons, the defendant, physically assaulted you on multiple occasions, is that correct? Yes, that's right, I replied, my voice steady despite the turmoil churning within. The first incident occurred about 3 months ago, when she threw a coffee mug at my head during an argument. I paused, taking another deep breath before continuing. And just last week, she ambushed me in the parking lot and shoved me to the ground, causing me to sustain minor injuries. A low murmur rippled through the courtroom, and I glanced nervously at the judge, who remained impassive, his brow furrowed in concentration. And you're sure it was Miss Simmons who committed these acts of violence? The prosecutor pressed, his gaze unwavering. Absolutely, I replied, my conviction clear. I had no doubt it was her. Karen let out a derisive snort, drawing the attention of the entire room. That's a load of crap, and you know it. She spat, her face flushing with rage. This is all just a pathetic attempt to get back at me for leaving your sorry ass. The prosecutor raised a hand, silencing her with a stern look. Order, order in the court, the judge bellowed, his voice booming across the room. Miss Simmons, you will refrain from further outbursts, or I will have you removed from this courtroom. Do I make myself clear? Karen's jaw tightened, but she nodded tersely, her knuckles white as she gripped the edge of the table. Satisfied, the prosecutor turned his attention back to me. Please continue with your testimony. I took a deep breath, my heart pounding in my chest. Well, as I was saying, the incidents of assault are undeniable. And I believe they were motivated by Karen's jealousy and rage over the dissolution of our relationship. Objection, Karen shouted, her voice shrill. That's pure speculation on his part. The judge's gavel came down with a resounding crack. Miss Simmons, I will not warn you again. One more outburst, and you will be held in contempt of court. Do you understand? Karen glared at me, her eyes smoldering with hatred, but she remained silent. Satisfied, the prosecutor turned his attention back to me. Please continue. I squared my shoulders, steeling myself for the final part of my testimony. The reason I'm here today is that I believe Karen's actions pose a genuine threat to my safety, and I'm asking the court to grant a restraining order to protect me from any further harm. The courtroom erupted in a flurry of murmurs and whispers, and I braced myself for Karen's inevitable reaction. But as I glanced in her direction, I was met with an unexpected sight. Her face had gone pale, her eyes wide with a dawning horror. And in that moment, I knew that the tide had turned. The silence in the courtroom was deafening, save for the frantic scribbling of the court reporter's pen. All eyes were fixed on Karen, her face a mask of barely controlled panic. Well, Miss Simmons, the judge prompted, his voice low and dangerous. Do you have anything to say in response to the witness's request for a restraining order? Karen's gaze darted around the room, settling on me for a moment before quickly looking away. I didn't, she stammered, her usual bravado nowhere to be found. Didn't what? Miss Simmons?" The judge pressed, his brow furrowed in a stern frown. "Didn't assault the witness? Didn't throw a coffee mug at his head? Didn't shove him to the ground in a parking lot?" Karen's mouth opened and closed several times, but no words came out. The air in the courtroom grew thick with tension, the unspoken truth hanging heavily between us. Finally, she seemed to find her voice. "Your Honor, I didn't realize the judge was watching," she whispered, her words barely audible. A collective gasp rippled through the room, and I felt my heart racing in my chest. Had she truly just admitted to her crimes in front of the entire court? The judge leaned forward, his eyes narrowing. "Are you suggesting, Miss Simmons, that had you known the judge was observing, you would not have assaulted the witness?" Karen's face flushed a deep crimson, and she averted her gaze, her shoulders slumping in defeat. I suppose that's what I'm saying, Your Honor." The prosecutor stepped forward, his expression a mixture of disbelief and triumph. "So let me get this straight, Miss Simmons. You're admitting to physically assaulting the witness, but only because you didn't think the judge was watching." Karen's lips pressed into a thin line, and she nodded stiffly. "Yes, that's correct." The courtroom erupted into a cacophony of voices, the judge's gavel pounding repeatedly as he called for order. I sat in stunned silence, scarcely able to believe what I was witnessing. Finally, the judge raised his hand, silencing the room. "Miss Simmons, I hope you understand the gravity of your admission. This court takes matters of assault and violence very seriously, regardless of whether the perpetrator believes they are being observed." Karen swallowed hard, her eyes downcast. "Yes, Your Honor, I understand." The judge's gaze swept across the room, his expression stern. "Then I have no choice but to grant the witness's request for a restraining order. Miss Simmons, you are hereby ordered to maintain a distance of no less than 500 yards from the witness at all times, effective immediately. Any violation of this order will result in your immediate arrest and prosecution for contempt of court. Do I make myself clear?" Karen nodded mutely, her face a mask of barely contained fury. I, on the other hand, felt a weight of relief wash over me, the tension in my shoulders finally beginning to ease. But as I glanced at Karen, I couldn't shake the unsettling feeling that this was far from over. The proverbial calm before the storm, as it were. And I had a sinking suspicion that the real battle was only just beginning. As the bailiffs escorted a seething Karen from the courtroom, I felt a sense of both relief and unease wash over me. The restraining order had been granted, but somehow I knew this was far from the end of our battle. The prosecutor approached me, a triumphant gleam in his eye. "Well, that went better than I expected," he said, offering me a curt nod. "Your testimony was compelling, and her admission of guilt was the icing on the cake." I forced a weak smile, my mind racing with 1,000 unanswered questions. "So, what happens now?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. The prosecutor's expression darkened slightly. "Now we wait. Karen has been ordered to stay away from you, but you'll need to be vigilant. Restraining orders don't always deter the truly determined." I swallowed hard, the reality of the situation sinking in. "You mean she might try to retaliate?" The prosecutor sighed, running a hand through his graying hair. "It's a distinct possibility, I'm afraid. Violent offenders don't take kindly to being held accountable for their actions." I felt a chill run down my spine, the gravity of the situation weighing heavily on my shoulders. "What should I do?" I asked, my voice thick with trepidation. "Stay alert, and don't let your guard down," the prosecutor replied, his tone stern. "Document any and all contact, no matter how minor. And if you ever feel that your safety is in jeopardy, don't hesitate to contact the authorities." I nodded, my mind whirling with a million contingency plans. "I'll be vigilant, I promise." The prosecutor offered me a reassuring pat on the shoulder. "Good. And remember, we're in this together. If Karen so much as looks at you the wrong way, you let me know." As I watched the prosecutor stride away, I couldn't shake the uneasy feeling that this was only the calm before the storm. Karen's rage had been barely contained in the courtroom, and I knew it was only a matter of time before she sought her revenge. I took a deep, steadying breath, steeling myself for the challenges that lay ahead. Whatever happened, I was determined to see this through to the end, no matter the cost. This wasn't just about me anymore. It was about justice, and putting an end to Karen's reign of terror once and for all. The next few weeks passed in a haze of vigilance and unease. I found myself constantly looking over my shoulder, jumping at the slightest unexpected sound. The prosecutor had been right. The restraining order offered little comfort, as I knew Karen was the type to stop at nothing to get her revenge. Each morning, I would check my car for any signs of tampering, my heart racing as I scanned the parking lot for any unfamiliar faces. At work, I kept the blinds drawn and the door locked, my eyes darting to the shadows every time someone passed by. The emotional toll was wearing me down, and I could feel the strain taking a physical toll as well. Sleepless nights and constant anxiety had left me on edge, my nerves frayed to the breaking point. One evening, as I was locking up the office, a sudden noise from the shadows sent a jolt of panic coursing through me. I froze, my keys clutched tightly in my hand, every muscle tense and ready to fight or flee. "Who's there?" I called out, my voice trembling slightly. A figure emerged from the darkness, and I felt my heart sink as I recognized a familiar silhouette. Karen. I breathed, my voice barely above a whisper. "Surprised to see me?" she hissed, her eyes narrowed to slits. "I bet you thought you could just waltz in here and ruin my life without any consequences, didn't you?" I took a step back, my mind racing to find a way out of this situation. "Karen, please," I pleaded. "You need to leave. The restraining order." "To hell with the restraining order," she spat, her voice dripping with venom. "You think a piece of paper is going to stop me from getting what I want." She took a step forward, and I felt my back press against the cold, hard wall of the building. Panic gripped me, and I knew I had to act fast. "Karen, don't do this," I begged, my voice rising in desperation. "Think about what you're doing. This won't end well for you." She let out a harsh, mirthless laugh. "Oh, I've thought about it, all right. And I've decided that I don't care what happens to me." She took another step forward, her eyes gleaming with a dangerous intensity. "All that matters is that you pay for what you've done." I braced myself, clutching the keys in my hand like a lifeline. As she lunged forward, I swung my arm with all my might, the sharp edge of the keys slicing through the air. The sound of her anguished scream shattered the stillness of the night, and I felt a surge of adrenaline as I broke free and ran, my legs carrying me as fast as they could. I had to get help, and fast, because if I didn't, I knew that this nightmare would only get worse. My heart pounded in my chest as I raced down the dimly lit streets, the adrenaline coursing through my veins. I had to find help, and fast. Karen was unhinged, and I knew she wouldn't stop until she got her revenge. As I rounded the corner, the flashing lights of a police cruiser came into view, and I felt a surge of relief. Throwing caution to the wind, I sprinted towards the car, waving my arms frantically. "Officer! Officer, please help!" I shouted, my voice shrill with panic. The officer, a seasoned veteran with a graying mustache, stepped out of the car, his brow furrowed with concern. "What's the problem, son?" he asked, his tone calm and authoritative. "It's Karen," I panted, the words tumbling out in a rush. "She violated the restraining order. She's at my office, and I think she's going to hurt me." The officer's expression hardened, and he reached for his radio. "Dispatch, this is Officer Daniels. I've got a 415 at 1234 Main Street, possible 245. Requesting backup, code 3. Within minutes, the air was filled with the wail of sirens, and a small caravan of police cars descended upon the scene. I watched, my heart pounding, as the officers swarmed the area, their weapons drawn. After what felt like an eternity, one of the officers approached me, a grim expression on his face. "Sir, we've apprehended the suspect. She's in custody now." I let out a shaky breath, the tension in my shoulders finally beginning to ease. "Thank God," I murmured, running a trembling hand through my hair. The officer placed a reassuring hand on my shoulder. "We're going to need you to come down to the station and give a statement. And we'll need you to file a formal report on the restraining order violation." I nodded, steeling myself for the ordeal to come. Of course. Anything to make sure she can't hurt me, or anyone else, ever again. As I followed the officer to his car, I couldn't help but feel a sense of both relief and dread. Karen was in custody, but I knew this was far from over. She had proven herself to be a formidable and relentless adversary, and I couldn't shake the feeling that she would find a way to retaliate, no matter the consequences. I settled into the back seat of the cruiser, my mind racing with 1,000 different scenarios. This wasn't just about me anymore. It was about justice, and ensuring that Karen's reign of terror was brought to a permanent end. No matter what it took, I was determined to see this through to the bitter end. The harsh fluorescent lights of the police station did little to ease the tension that hung thick in the air. As I sat in the small interview room, my fingers drumming nervously on the scared wooden table, I couldn't help but feel a sense of foreboding. The door opened, and a seasoned detective strode in, his expression unreadable. "Mr. Daniels, thanks for coming in," he said, taking a seat across from me. "I'm Detective Grimes, and I'll be handling the case against Ms. Simmons." I swallowed hard, my mouth suddenly dry. "What's going to happen now?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. Detective Grimes leaned back in his chair, his brow furrowed in thought. "Well, the good news is that we've got Miss Simmons in custody for violating the restraining order. The bad news is that this isn't going to be a simple open and shut case." I felt my heart sink. "What do you mean?" The detective sighed, running a hand through his graying hair. "Miss Simmons is a tough nut to crack. She's got a history of violence and a reputation for being resourceful and vindictive. She's not going to go down without a fight." I nodded, my mind racing with the implications. "So, what happens next?" "We'll need you to give a detailed statement about the incident tonight, as well as any previous incidents of assault or harassment," Detective Grimes explained. "The more evidence we can gather, the better our chances of keeping Ms. Simmons behind bars for a significant amount of time." I took a deep breath, steeling myself for the task ahead. "All right, let's do it." Over the next hour, I recounted the events that had led to this point, leaving no detail untouched. The detective listened intently, occasionally jotting down notes or asking probing questions. As I finished, Detective Grimes leaned back in his chair, a contemplative expression on his face. "This is a pretty serious case, Mr. Daniels. Miss Simmons is facing multiple charges, including assault, stalking, and violation of a restraining order. If we can prove that her actions were premeditated and posed a credible threat to your safety, she could be looking at a substantial prison sentence." I felt a surge of relief, but it was tempered by a lingering sense of unease. "So, what happens now?" "Now we build our case," the detective replied, his tone grave. "We'll need to collect any evidence, interview witnesses, and ensure that Miss Simmons has no opportunity to retaliate or interfere with the investigation." I nodded, my mind already whirring with possibilities. "I'll do whatever it takes to make sure she can't hurt me, or anyone else, ever again." Detective Grimes offered me a rare smile. "That's good to hear, Mr. Daniels. This won't be easy, but with your cooperation, we've got a fighting chance of putting Miss Simmons away for a long time." As I left the police station, I couldn't shake the feeling that the worst was yet to come. Karen Simmons was a formidable adversary, and I knew that she wouldn't go down without a fight. But this time, I was determined to come out on top, no matter what it took. The weeks that followed were a whirlwind of activity as the investigation into Karen's actions intensified. Detective Grimes and his team worked tirelessly, gathering evidence and building a comprehensive case against the increasingly defiant and uncooperative defendant. I found myself caught in the eye of the storm, my life upended by the constant need to provide statements, participate in interviews, and ensure that every detail of my interactions with Karen was thoroughly documented. The emotional toll was relentless, and I found myself constantly on edge, jumping at the slightest unexpected sound. But through it all, I remained steadfast in my determination to see this through to the end. The thought of Karen roaming free to continue her campaign of harassment and violence, was unacceptable. I knew that if I wavered, even for a moment, the consequences could be dire. And then, the breakthrough I had been waiting for. A witness, a former coworker of Karen's, came forward with damning testimony that corroborated my account of the escalating pattern of abuse. With this new evidence in hand, the prosecution was finally able to build a solid case, and the wheels of justice began to turn with renewed vigor. The day of the trial arrived, and as I sat in the witness stand, my heart pounding in my chest, I knew that this was my chance to finally put an end to this nightmare. Karen's eyes bored into me, her expression a disturbing mix of fury and desperation, but I refused to be cowed. When the prosecution rested its case, Karen's attorney stood, a smug grin on his face. "Your Honor, the defense would like to call Miss Simmons to the stand." The judge nodded, his expression unreadable. "Very well, proceed." As Karen took the stand, her posture confident and defiant, I felt a chill run down my spine. I knew that she was about to pull out all the stops in a desperate attempt to salvage her case, and I braced myself for the onslaught. But as the cross-examination unfolded, something unexpected happened. Karen's carefully constructed facade began to crumble, and cracks in her story started to emerge. The more the defense attorney pushed, the more flustered and evasive she became, until finally, the truth came spilling out in a torrent of damning admissions. I watched, scarcely daring to breathe, as the judge's expression darkened with each revelation. When the dust had settled, the verdict was all but certain. Karen Simmons was going away for a very, very long time. As the bailiffs escorted the defeated and despondent woman from the courtroom, I felt a flood of emotions wash over me. Relief, triumph, and a lingering sense of sadness, for what might have been, had Karen's path not led her down this dark and twisted road. But as I stepped out into the sunlight, I knew that this chapter of my life was finally coming to a close. The nightmare was over, and the future, though uncertain, was once again filled with the promise of hope. As the heavy wooden doors of the courthouse swung shut behind me, I felt a weight lift from my shoulders. The long, arduous journey through the legal system had finally reached its conclusion, and the verdict was one of justice and accountability. Karen Simmons, once a formidable adversary, had been sentenced to a lengthy prison term, her campaign of harassment and violence brought to a resounding end. The relief I felt was palpable, a sense of closure that had been so long in the making. Yet, as I stood there, basking in the warm afternoon sun, I couldn't help but feel a tinge of melancholy. The scars left by Karen's relentless attacks would not heal overnight, and the emotional toll of the past months would linger for some time to come. But in the midst of the turmoil, I had found strength, the unwavering determination to see this through, no matter the cost. And in that, I found a glimmer of hope, a reminder that even in the darkest of times, the human spirit has the power to prevail. As I made my way to my car, I couldn't help but reflect on the journey that had led me here. The twists and turns, the moments of despair and triumph, all culminating in this final, satisfying conclusion. It was a testament to the resilience of the human spirit, and a reminder that even when the odds seem insurmountable, there is always a path forward. I slid behind the wheel, a sense of purpose filling me. This was not the end, but rather the beginning of a new chapter, one where I could reclaim my life, my freedom, and my sense of security. With Karen safely behind bars, the future once again seemed full of possibility. As I drove away from the courthouse, I couldn't help but feel a renewed sense of optimism. The storm had passed, and the sun was finally breaking through the clouds. And with each mile that put distance between me and the demons of my past, I knew that the path ahead, while uncertain, was one filled with the promise of a brighter tomorrow.